Imagine lining up at quarterback only to see a man across the line who played an entire playoff run on a broken leg and still made it his mission to break you.
The play here. What a big play. Both sides. Tony Hill wide right.
That's Jack Youngblood, the NFL's original nightmare fuel. For 14 relentless seasons, Youngblood turned the pocket into a danger zone. Quarterbacks would literally change plays at the line just to avoid his wrath. He wasn't just tough, he was a force of nature, hunting quarterbacks with a mix of raw power, pain tolerance, and a look that said, "You're next." How did one man become so feared that offensive coordinators still talk about him with a shudder decades after he retired? Let's break down the intimidation tactics, the legendary moments, and the legacy of the most terrifying defensive end the NFL has ever seen. This is the story of Jack Youngblood, the meanest player in the NFL, and the reason quarterbacks lost sleep on Saturday nights. Before we dive into the carnage, hit that subscribe button because this channel is your one-stop shop for the most insane NFL stories you've never heard.
I tell you, that's worse than a boom. That's when the
Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Jack Leslie Youngblood wasn't born mean. He was forged that way. Growing up in Jacksonville, Florida, this wasn't some privileged kid destined for greatness. This was a blue-collar warrior who learned early that if you wanted something, you had to take it. At the University of Florida, coaches knew they had something special. But special doesn't even begin to describe what Youngblood would become. Picture this, a 6'4", 247-pound monster with the speed of a linebacker and the rage of a man who'd been personally wronged by every quarterback on earth. But here's where it gets interesting. Youngblood didn't just want to beat you. He wanted to break your will. Former teammates say he'd study quarterbacks like a predator studies prey. He knew their weaknesses, their tells, their fears, and he'd exploit every single one. What made Youngblood different wasn't just his physical tools, it was his psychological warfare. This man turned intimidation into an art form. First, the stare. Quarterbacks from the 70s and 80s still talk about Youngblood's pre-snap glare. It wasn't just intimidating, it was soul-crushing. He'd lock eyes with you from across the line like he was reading your obituary. Then came the trash talk. But Youngblood's trash talk was different. He didn't scream or yell, he'd whisper. Former Raiders quarterback Ken Stabler once said Youngblood would lean in during pileups and calmly explain exactly how he was going to hurt you on the next play. And then he'd do it. But here's the genius part. Youngblood understood that fear spreads through an offensive line like a virus. Break one lineman's confidence, and suddenly the whole protection scheme crumbles. He'd target the weakest link, destroy him early, and watch the domino effect. But wait until you hear what he did to Joe Theismann that made him consider retirement. But first, let me tell you about the most insane display of toughness in NFL history. January 1980 NFC Championship game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. First quarter, Jack Youngblood fractures his fibula, that's your leg bone, for those keeping track at home. Now, here's where normal humans would tap out. Here's where 99.9% of NFL players would call it a day. But Jack Youngblood, this absolute maniac, looked at his broken leg and said, "That'll do." He didn't just finish the game, he dominated it. Then, he played the entire Super Bowl on that broken leg. But here's the part that'll give you chills. Opposing quarterbacks said he was even more terrifying with the broken leg.
Favre under pressure and goes down. What a hit from Ray Lewis.
Because now he was playing angry. For a second, you're a quarterback. You know this man is literally playing on a broken bone, and he's still hunting you down like a bloodhound. What does that do to your mental state? How do you prepare for that level of insanity? Dallas Cowboys quarterback Danny White later admitted he had nightmares about facing Youngblood after that playoff run. Not metaphorical nightmares, actual sleep-disrupting, wake-up-in-cold-sweat nightmares. Now let's talk about the carnage. Because Youngblood didn't just intimidate quarterbacks, he collected them like trophies. The Joe Theismann incident I mentioned, 1979, Monday Night Football. Theismann drops back, confident, maybe a little too cocky. Youngblood comes screaming around the edge like a freight train with anger management issues. The hit was so vicious, so perfectly timed, that Theismann later said he seriously considered hanging up his cleats. This is Joe Theismann we're talking about, a guy who played through his own share of pain. But Youngblood broke something in him that day. Then there was the Atlanta Falcons game where Youngblood sacked Steve Bartkowski so hard that Bartkowski forgot his own playbook. I'm not exaggerating. The man had temporary amnesia from the hit. The medical staff had to quiz him on basic football concepts. But here's a crazy what if. What if Youngblood had played in today's NFL with modern training methods and nutrition? With his pain tolerance and psychological warfare skills. Modern quarterbacks think they have it tough now. Imagine facing a prime Jack Youngblood who's been hitting the gym with today's science. The man once played 96 straight games without missing a snap. Let that sink in. In an era where players were basically human crash test dummies, Youngblood was the one doing the crashing. What separates Youngblood from other tough players is how he weaponized fear. This wasn't accidental. It was calculated psychological terrorism. Former offensive coordinator Don Coryell revealed that teams would literally design their entire game plan around avoiding Youngblood, not just double-teaming him, completely restructuring their offense to keep quarterbacks away from his side of the field. But here's the genius. Youngblood knew this, so he'd deliberately line up in different positions, mess with formations, make quarterbacks guess where the pain was coming from. It was mental chess, and quarterbacks were always 3 moves behind. Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Terry Bradshaw once said that preparing to face Youngblood was like preparing to fight a grizzly bear. You know it's gonna hurt. You know you might not survive, but you have to step into the cage anyway. But the most terrifying thing about Youngblood? He got meaner as games went longer. While other players got tired, he got hungry. And what happened in the fourth quarter would haunt quarterbacks for years. When Youngblood retired in 1984, it wasn't just the end of a career. It was the end of an era of pure, unfiltered intimidation. The NFL would never see another player quite like him. Modern defensive players study Youngblood's film not just for technique, but for mentality. How do you play through pain? How do you break an opponent's spirit? How do you become the player that keeps quarterbacks awake at night? The crazy part? Youngblood never considered himself mean. In interviews, he's this soft-spoken gentleman who talks about football like it's art.
That something might not be quite right. So I go in, the trainer looks at it, he almost
But
fights.
once that helmet went on, he transformed into something else entirely. Today's NFL players are bigger, faster, stronger than ever. But they'll tell you straight up, none of them have that Youngblood mentality, that willingness to play through anything, to make pain your friend, to turn intimidation into a weapon. So what do you think? Could any current defensive player match Youngblood's intimidation factor? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to smash that like button if this story gave you chills. If you're hungry for more legendary NFL stories that'll blow your mind, check out our video about the player who was so clever where NFL had to change the rules of the game. Link is right here. We're Kicker Throne. And remember, in the NFL, legends aren't born, they're broken in. See you in the next one.